Pokemon Video Game Competition, or VGC, is the name given for the official competition using the mainline games. I personally love playing VGC, and I also like to watch it sometimes. But the thing is, I don't see enough queer people taking part in it. I know we have queer people playing Pokemon in general, I just don't see a lot of queer people playing VGC. Pokemon as a franchise has been attracting loads and loads of queer people for years. And if you want to know a little bit more of the whys and all that, please go watch Cecilia's video. She has a wonderful essay on why, most likely, we as queer people love Pokemon. So if we have such a strong player base, why are not more of us going into VGC? And this is something that has always frustrated me. So then I decided to try and find an answer for this. So welcome to the very first video essay that I am doing on this channel, where I answer the following question. Why don't we have more queer people playing VGC? Now, I know a lot of you are probably thinking to yourselves all the reasons why you wouldn't play VGC, or what are the reasons that you don't see a lot of queer people playing VGC. But before I get into specifically Pokemon, we have to understand a little bit the relationship that we as queer people have with gaming, and specifically competitive gaming. According to a report from Glad Gaming, 1 in 5 active gamers are part of the LGBTQIA+ community. They start this report by saying that the lack of LGBTQIA+ representation in video games is often explained by the assumption that the stereotypical core video game customer is a white, heterosexual, cisgender man between the ages of 18 and 34. But their data shows that 17% of active gamers are actually LGBTQIA+, which is an increase of 70% according to another research done by Nielsen in 2020. Now, the thing is, I wasn't able to find any data about the presence of queer people specifically in esports, but if you are part of any underrepresented group, you know that we share a lot of similar experiences. You know who is also considered an underrepresented group? Women. And we do have queer women. So I decided to get all the data that I found in regards to gender and the experience of women in gaming, just so we can make a point of what could also be the experience of queer people in gaming. According to a study made by Women in Tech, women are half of the gamers worldwide as of 2023. Now, when it comes to women in esports, I was able to only find one data point from 2019 that says that 5% of professional gamers are women. Although there was not a lot in terms of representation specifically in esports, there was a lot of data when it comes to people who actually enjoy watching esports. And also a lot of data on, spoiler alert and trigger warning, men.
It was scary.
A 2022 study from Deloitte shows that 63% of esports viewers in Europe identify as male. When we look into the US, 72% of esports fans identify as male, according to IDC in 2020. And also, according to statistics on esports interest from 2023, men are 3 times more likely to be esports fans than women. When I was deep in research around the internet, reading a lot of articles and studies about diversity in gaming and queer people in gaming and women's experience in gaming and all that, there are 2 main conclusions that I take from everything that I read. First, anywhere in the gaming world where we will have to interact with other players, either through chat or voice chat, play in teams, and or broadcast to an audience, we will most likely have a poor experience because of all the harassment and the way that we are treated. If the people that are watching us or playing with us or interacting with us are not part of the groups that we are part of. The second conclusion is that for us to have at least a decent experience in any gaming without having to pick and choose games, places, and communities, it's gonna take a lot of work, a lot of teaching, a lot of changing behavior, a lot of things that take a long time to be able to actually change. Now, this is not a new thing. If you think about any STEM-related career, for example, the experience is the same. Think about software engineering 10 years ago. Very much male-dominated. But now we have way more people from way more diverse backgrounds being in the software engineering world. But there was a long and treacherous way to get there. So what are the main takeaways I want you to take out of all these data that are just thrown in your face? Although there's a lot of people who are not straight men playing video games, being in the gaming world, a very small portion actually goes into competitive gaming. The common main reason that everybody shares all those articles we're talking about is the same experience that everyone who's not a straight man has when they try to enter a male-dominated field. Toxicity, prejudice, discrimination, harassment, inappropriate sexual behavior, and grown men acting like 10-year-olds. You know what I think is so rich? Men think they have nothing to do with it, but there's a literal plan from the United Nations to make sure we achieve gender equality that says that we have to center men when we are talking about gender experiences, because men also suffer a lot with toxic masculinity. But anyway, we're here to talk about Pokemon, but we were able to establish that so far, our experience in average is not great. So let's see how that experience translates specifically into the world of Pokemon. I couldn't find any data about the presence of queer people in Pokémon VGC, but interesting enough, I couldn't even find about gender. So what I did, I took matters into my own hands, and I went through a global list of players who were qualified to the Pokémon Worlds of this year, and from there on, it was just a little bit of a game of guessing. Also, this list was last updated on May 22nd. By the time I was filming this video, still the same date. And before I actually go into the results, let me explain how I got there. I focused on gender. I did not classify anybody as LGBTQIA+, because that would require a lot of assumptions. And classifying someone by the way they present their gender needs way less assumptions considering how they present themselves to the world. So I classified people as femme-presenting considering the following criteria. Name exclusively used by women in the country they are from. They are femme-presenting in pictures they have available on social media, and also the pronouns they have in bio. I also went through their profiles just to get a second level of confirmation if they would refer to themselves as she, her, and so on and so forth. So I only classified as femme-presenting the ones that I was 100% sure would meet the majority of this criteria. So have that in mind before you come for me, because this is not 100% exact. And I hope I didn't misgender anybody. But here's the thing. Out of the 626 qualified players for Worlds, 3% are femme-presenting. North America is the region with the most amount of femme-presenting people being qualified, with a mind-boggling number of 7 people. So this tells us that out of the entirety of the people who consistently play VGC and also have good results enough to get to the global competition, 18 people are femme-presenting. And before anybody goes into these comments saying, oh my god, so you're saying that women are worse and yada yada, no. Watch this video until the end and you understand why we have these numbers. Now, when you look at what you can actually see, what is given to you in terms of content and in terms of visibility, just the information that gets to you, be it content creators, the algorithm throws in your face, creators people refer to you, and what is shown to us in the official VGC events, the vast majority of these people are male presenting and presumably straight. The official Pokemon events are very PG, which makes sense because this is a game marketed for children. And the good thing about these events being very PG is that, at least from what we are watching, we are able to avoid all the bad things that we normally see in male-dominated fields, such as any sort of competitive gaming. But when it comes to Discord and social media,
Honey.
It's really very simple. Let's check the board.
Among Us became a trans rights icon because Wolfie Glick used it to defeat the very last Pokemon of the very last match, guaranteeing him the win of the Orlando Regionals in April 2024. And he did that against the other finalist who was outed for having extremely transphobic views and also for catfishing as a minor to, according to him, to catch a predator. But then there's this deleted tweet where he says it was a joke between him and a friend. I don't know, that's the weird part of the story. But anyway, the fact of the matter is, he got exposed during the weekend where he was there in Orlando playing. Any sort of behavior like that is extremely against the play Pokemon rules. Also, in the venue, when you are playing, any sort of behavior that could be at least understood as like taunting, treating the other player unfairly or bad, is extremely against the play Pokemon rules. But none of that even mattered because this VGC player wrote an entire Google Docs about how he understands that he is wrong and he is very young and he needs to focus more on his studies and his mental health himself and try to improve as a human being. And then he removed himself from the VGC world. And we all celebrated on the internet, making Amungus a trans icon, nominating Groupon as the representative of trans wrongs, apparently. Anyway, so that's what happens when you are a person with terrible takes in a community full of queer people and women. This is a more serious story that involves a VGC player and their partner. Their partner created a Twitter account to share this entire story, trying to avoid the maximum amount of retaliation they could get. And this account was created in February 2024, just days before that person posted an entire Google Docs going into detail on what happened. To make a long story short, this person was in a relationship with a VGC player that had quite a prominent name in the community, and the VGC player sexually assaulted their partner. And the partner was so afraid of saying anything and was so distressed by the entire situation that it took them quite long to come out and share the story, and they even did it from a throwaway Twitter account. Their fear comes from the fact that apparently this VGC player has a lot of connections in the Pokémon Company International, and they didn't know what sort of retaliation could fall on them. And to add insult to injury, he was close friends with people that did not take sexual assault seriously and would harass other people that cared about the topic. They created an entire Google Docs, as you do, sharing their entire experience, what happened, how it happened, and brought in several screenshots from several conversations they had where the VGC player apologizes repeatedly for sexually assaulting the person and for leading them on. I am not going to go into more detail in respect for the victim. I am using this situation to make the point that I'm going to make as soon as I go through all the situations I brought here today. Now, I believe this VGC player is not competing anymore. His Twitter, of course, it's blocked. And while I was researching more about it, I found out that apparently years before, the same VGC player was under a little bit of controversy because apparently he was cheating. This is a little bit of a happier story with a happy ending, okay? But I want to go through it. In 2021, messages from a Discord server were leaked with a bunch of people in the VGC community, including Eduardo Cunha, who's a very prominent VGC player, also a world champion. And the types of conversations that were being held there were, for the lack of a better term, the typical disgusting man locker room talk with a dash of sexism and transphobia. And what happened is there was a thread created exposing this whole Discord server. Apparently someone got in, found the messages and exposed it on Twitter. And also they exposed a few DMs shared with Eduardo as well. After the whole thing, Eduardo interacted with the thread, apologized, took accountability for his part, took some time off the internet for 10 months, came back, wrote another document saying how he feels like he still needs to change. He's a better man now. He did a lot of self-work. He wants to do better, but he still feels like he doesn't have a space in the VGC community, which was extremely well received by fans and by other people. They understood his side, they understood what happened, and he went on to win Worlds the same year. Now, this is not an expose on Eduardo Cunha whatsoever, but I am using this story to show that if this is one example of one Discord server that exists out there, can you imagine what your favorite VGC player is saying on private Discord servers with random people or with fans that might be influenced by their behavior? The icon and friend of the pod, Widow Tweenido, a few years ago shared the fact that they are non-binary. And as any queer person on a part of the internet that is very male-dominated, talks about their queerness, gets a whole spectrum of different reactions. You have the ones that were honestly kind of funny. You have the reactions of people that are kind of problematic, and then you just have the garbage, boo-boo garbage reactions, terrible people, disgusting. And I wanted to bring this as the last example because, to be honest, this is the average experience of a queer person on the internet, if anybody was wondering. Now, we only saw 4 examples of situations where the VGC community is messy and problematic at times. But the point is, the average queer experience is that 100% of the times we are in a situation where queer people are not the majority. We will deal with backlash, microaggressions, inappropriate curiosity, and I don't understand why the first thing that straight what people think about when they find out about our queerness is what do we do in bed and what do we have between our legs? Get your head out of the gutter. So yeah, VGC also shows signs of that male toxicity that we can see in competitive gaming and gaming in general. Now, if you think about what's the objective for someone to play competitive gaming, it's generally because you are good at the game that you like and you want to compete with other people to also find community, which is something that is very important. But then you go into these male-dominated spaces trying to find community, trying to have fun, and you have to keep worrying about the way you say things, and you have to keep worrying that people will harass you, will treat you bad, and will, I don't know, treat you like a human being and not like a piece of meat or not something that is considered wrong. But all of this still doesn't properly answer the question of why queer people are not participating more in VGC. We have ideas, we have data, but now I need some empirical experience. So I went around some of my amazing friends who are also Pokemon content creators, and I asked them 3 questions. Before they actually got into VGC, what was the reason that made them not get into it? The second question is, now that they have played some level of VGC or been interacting with the VGC world, what are the main issues they see? And the third question, why do they think that we don't have more queer people playing VGC? I want to thank these 8 amazing content creators for being so generous with their time, knowledge, and perspective so I could make this video happen. And for the answers, I've also factored in my own perspective. It's an intimidating environment in 2 levels. First one, competitive gaming or anything competitive in general is an intimidating environment. So some of us do not necessarily enjoy competitive environments that much. And 2, tracking back to a lot of the things that I said so far, it's a male-dominated field, which brings that fear that I was talking about of being treated badly, of having to deal with that toxicity, of having to deal with harassment. So you want to go to a place to have fun and enjoy the game you like, but it's frustrating when you look at a male-dominated place because you know you're not going to be able to just go there and have fun. You're probably going to be constantly worrying if something is going to happen to you. There is little to no space for creative expression through the Pokemon you want to use while actually being successful in VGC. And this basically speaks to the meta. And interesting enough, a lot of people didn't know that the official way of playing competitive Pokemon is as it is, you know, double battles and all that. I know you all see this coming. I know everyone complains about it, and we are gonna complain too, but there's a good reason. The lack of variety in the meta. Let me just give you some data, because I am a data girl. The most recent regulation we have is Regulation G. I went to this one quite famous repository of teams called VGC Pastes, and out of the 633 teams that they have there that were used in the entirety of Regulation G until June 6, 30 Pokemon appeared in at least 7% of the teams, and 7 Pokemon appeared in at least 25% of the teams. So unless you are really, really good at Pokemon and you really understand how the meta works and how to play it, so you are able to play around the meta to be able to have a glimpse of self-expression and use your favorite Pokemon, you're basically stuck with these 30 Pokemon if you want to have a chance. For reference, there are actually 457 fully evolved Pokemon and a total of 1,025 Pokemon. Not all of them are available in Scarlet and Violet, but still. Connected to this last point, a lot of the designs of the Pokemon that are in the meta, they tend to appeal to more hetero male identities, and the ones that tend to appeal more to queer people are basically not there, with the exception maybe of like a few Pokemon. And the third point is, even though we have players that are very relevant who are allies, like again Wolfie Glick, we have casters who are queer people, this doesn't mean that we do not have to deal what we are used to dealing with in our day-to-day as queer people. And to close the Q&A portion of this video, Karen from the Elite Four has a very famous quote in the games that people like to use to make this point. The quote goes as follows: "Strong Pokemon, weak Pokemon, that is only the selfish perception of people. Truly skilled trainers should try to win with the Pokemon they love best." And this quote greatly represents the type of narrative that we are fed when we play Pokemon, when we watch the anime, and that allows us to see self-expression and to choose favorites and be excited about different and specific Pokemon appearing and being used. And this is something that speaks very nearly and dearly to queer people, self-expression, because our self-expression is treated as a shameful thing. This is data research. This is not my opinion now. We grow in a world where being who we are, presenting as who we are, is met with shame and fear. So people makes us feel like it's a shame to be like we are. And we are fearful of the world around us, which has several impacts on our mental health, at work, in our homes. So that's why, for example, we use the word pride, because the world constantly tells us in different ways that we should be ashamed of being who we are. And self-expression is an incredibly powerful tool that we have to fight against all this oppression. And Pokemon, with that quote and the way that the story goes, gives us the space where we can express who we are through our favorite Pokemon, to a typing that we like.
Let's talk about the F word.
Having that story and being so excited about that narrative, and Pokemon is mainly about Pokemon battles when you think about what is the competitive aspect of Pokemon. And then we go to VGC, for example, and we are met with the bleak reality that this is basically a game of chess. This is a game of probabilities. This is not a game of make the best of your favorite Pokemon. Because if your favorite Pokemon sucks, when it comes to what is VGC, the amount of work that you will have to put in place, the amount of knowledge, the amount of gimmicks, the amount of workarounds you would have to put in place to be able to use the Pokemon you want, a lot of the times is not worth the trade-off. So what VGC fails to do is to capture that fantasy and that narrative that we see so much in the games, we see so much in the stories. And to summarize, in the words of Fawn, average Debbie plays Pokemon because Pikachu is cute. Then she wants to start playing online and Pikachu is unplayable. Now, the next point is about representation. I'm starting to repeat myself because those are the very basis of what we as queer people need when we are going somewhere. Although we are seeing more queer people and allied cis hetero people growing in the scene, which makes us happy and gives us a better sense of safeness and security to go into these spaces, it is still, again, a cis hetero male dominated field. As I said before, when you look at the official streams, you barely see anyone that is different from a man playing. So with the visual cues we have, this is very discouraging for two reasons. First, when we are the first ones going into a field where we are not the majority or we don't exist there, we get into this role of a trailblazer where there's so much we have to deal with, so much work to do, so much stress we go through. We already have enough on our plates in a lot of places in our life. And then once again, it goes down to the treatment. We are scared and wary of cis hetero men. If you are not a straight man watching me, you know what I'm talking about. You have experienced this. Once we see ourselves being celebrated in a space, we then feel safe. So that's why we have to respect and celebrate the ones that decided to take the role of the trailblazers and really open up that space for other people and give people either a corner in the world that they can feel comfortable, or for being a queer person that entered that space and showed everybody that, yes, more people can be here and I am going to fight for this spot. But if you go back, I talked about how many queer people we have playing Pokemon, talking about Pokemon. Considering how things are today, what are all these queer people doing? The best way to answer this question is self-expression. And as we were able to define as of now, VGC is not the best of giving us an avenue to self-express. So we are shiny hunting. We are playing Nuzlocke. We are creating specific rules for playthroughs so we can use the Pokemon we want. So we are able to try out things the way we want to. We create our own rules. And even when we talk about Pokemon battling in VGC, some of us even do that, maybe with our communities, with friends, but with very restrictive rules, so we are able to have that experience, but only using the Pokemon we want to use without being just steamrolled by a legendary or by the strongest Pokemon in the meta today. And more recently, big universes that are connecting Pokemon with a bunch of queer experiences when we think about the girly pop universe, or when we think about content creators connecting drag queens to Pokemon. But still, the VGC part of this universe is not very well explored. And you know what? Maybe someone should organize a VGC competition with only queer people, with a completely different meta, which allows that level of self-expression that I've been talking about. That would be interesting. So far, I have talked about the community aspect, the player base aspect, but we have to remember that behind every huge franchise, there is a huge corporation. In this case, too, we have the Pokemon Company, which is in Japan, and the Pokemon Company International. And the reason why I want to talk a little bit about the corporate side of things when it comes to fostering the community you have that uses your product, we have to remember that they can have an active and deliberate role about the game rules, about inclusivity, what can be shown and cannot be shown publicly. So if a company wanted to have initiatives to have more queer people, more women in their player base, for example, they could invest in that. Just a quick example of one thing that might seem small, but actually represents something huge. Ollie Dreamer, who is a big Pokemon content creator on TikTok, was invited to be at Worlds as a notable trainer. This is a big win for us. This represents a lot because he is unapologetically queer. All of this that we're talking about, the self-expression, the teams, that's a lot in his content. And he was invited to Worlds, which shows that there might be something happening there. But you might be asking yourself,
great. That's good to know. So a company could do more. Why wouldn't the Pokemon Company do more?
to be able to answer all that, we have to talk about how corporations work in terms of company culture and decision making, so we can understand how they approach diversity. Before I dive into that, let me just give you a little bit of background from where I come from, so it's not just a bunch of opinions and just this random person. I have 14 years of experience in various different capacities in the corporate world while working with people from the literal entire world. Although I've lived in 3 countries so far. 12 of those 14 years I worked in HR. I know, HR is not your friend. We know all of that. There are very clear reasons why I left HR and never came back, although I still work with things that could be considered HR topics. But anyway, those 12 years in HR and my last 2 years working with my own consulting business, I had my fair share experiences of seeing company culture grow, seeing company culture fail. I look at corporate culture in 3 layers. What the company defined as what is the culture, the actual reality of what is the company culture, and the individual experience with culture. I bet you never thought you would see a quick lesson on what is company culture and corporate culture on a YouTube video about Pokemon, huh? What a company wants their culture to be. Regardless of how a company is created, they are always created from an idea. That idea is the solution of a problem that exists out there in the world. And because we live in a capitalist society, the vast majority of these companies want to use this idea to make as much profit as possible. This solution then is told to the general public in a glorified and sometimes very subjective statement that we all call company mission, which can be described as why the way that company makes profit is cool and you should give your money to it. If a mission is what problem a company solves and the why that is important, the how the problem is solved is what is considered their product, their service, or both. To make that happen, you need people. A lot of people, not a lot of people, but you need people anyway. A company culture then is born as a way to make it clear to everyone the rules of the game in a little bit of a more subjective way, because culture is based on beliefs, and those beliefs come from the people that founded the very company that other people are working at. So what companies do, they try to summarize those beliefs and the way they want things to be in a set of values, in a set of behaviors, in a beautiful PowerPoint, and things they stick on the walls that should ideally indicate what is the experience of working at a company and what is important for that company. So then, if that is true, every decision, process, experience should be heavily based on that company culture, right? Let's talk about the culture in practice. All of the things that I said about what a company wants the culture to be is beautiful in theory, but how the company culture is in reality can be seen through three main things. The experience people have, the beliefs that the created culture is based on, and the actions, which represents decision-making. In other words, the reasoning that I use to make a decision in a company reinforces or destroys a culture. Simple as that. So a quick example. Let's look at Ben & Jerry's. Activism is something that has always been part of their brand. They always position themselves whenever something is happening around the world, and it's even part of their values. And even though they are part of a bigger company, they never lost this activism and continued speaking out. If you go into their website, there is an activism page where they show all the causes that matter to them, and they even tell people how they can also help. So this is a good example of a company that really does what they say they believe in. Now let's look at another example where what is said is not what it's done. Let's assume Brittany Broski is a company. She has a history of speaking out about social justice issues. And when a content creator like Brittany with such a huge platform talks about it, her audience not only engages, but also is influenced in engaging in the same discussion as well. So if you're translating to a corporate environment, a company that positions itself in a certain way signals to their employees what they can and cannot expect from that company. So it came as a surprise when Brittany didn't say anything about Gaza when so many other companies, content creators were speaking on it. She did then do a podcast where in the beginning she talks about Palestine and what's going on in Gaza. But then right after that podcast went live, a close friend's video of her got leaked. And in this video, she criticizes the expectation people have on influencers on talking about political topics. When we translate that back to the corporate world, when a company behaves in a way that is different than what they have been behaving or positioning themselves, this generates a break of trust. And then people have a hard time trusting that company again, which also means that anything that that company, or in this case, Brittany Broski does, it's going to be questioned, criticized, and received by a portion of the people with low credibility. So no matter what they say or whatever dream they're trying to sell, if all of this is not reflected on the decision making, on the strategies they design, on the goals they set for that company, it will just feel weird. If the way people are promoted, the way people are recognized, people are hired, if it's not based on that set of beliefs/values, then that is not happening. Then that is not the reality. It is normal for you to have, the bigger the company is, micro cultures, if that makes sense, in different places, offices, and so on, because then we start to get to a more individual level or team-based level, because there's a lot of other factors that impact that. Because even though a company does everything right, some people have horrible experiences. And that's why we need to check the third layer, which is the individual experience. Now, an individual's experience with a company culture is through a combination of three factors. One, what the company says the culture is, plus what is that real experience? Two, cultures from countries which include country where the office is located, country where the person, the individual, comes from or was raised in, countries where their peers are, and the country where the manager is. And the third, it's their direct manager, their direct leadership. Can you guess which one represents the biggest influence in a person's experience with
company culture?
If you guessed leadership, you guessed absolutely correctly. So regardless of everything a company does, if you have a terrible manager, Diva, I am so sorry to tell you, you could be working in one of those very hyped up companies who apparently have the best cultures in the world. Your experience is going to be terrible because your direct manager is making your life a living hell. Now that we talked about all of this, so the companies that are so adamant about diversity, I feel like corporate airing doing this whole part of this video. A company that is like really cares about diversity and all of that, creating a safe space for everyone and psychological safety and all that bullshit, will of course be making deliberate decisions to be as inclusive as possible, right?
Well, sort of, kind of.
The real reason why companies struggle to really move forward their agendas with diversity is because it comes with a cost. And only the companies that are able to stomach those costs and the change that it takes for you to be really good with diversity are the companies that actually go through it and are successful doing it. Now, why diversity comes with a cost? Diversity in the world of work exists in relation to the logic of productivity in capitalism. That logic of productivity has two main components. The first component is the image of the person that was used as a reference to say what does it mean to be productive. And that was created during the Industrial Revolution, and that image is a straight white cis man. The second component is doing more with less, which means making a lot of money, spending the least amount of money possible. The most important resource to make all of this work is time. So that means that the person who is working under capitalism needs to have focused time doing their work so they are able to produce. Considering that this was all created by men and for men, this means that a man then, in the logic of productivity under capitalism, is the one that is giving the entirety of their time to that idea of being productive to someone else, to make money in a company, for example. But if this man is there all the time, he still needs to eat, he still needs to have a clean place to come back to, he still needs to have his kids taken care of. And who does that job? Exactly, women. So capitalism to work needs a lot of what is called unpaid labor, which is housework, that historically women do that role. Now, because we're talking about a rationale of productivity, meaning being the man, that means that a woman is not considered productive because she's at home doing what is unpaid labor, because productivity is related to things you do to make money. But let's talk about that unpaid labor. In today's society, in average, women do around 25.3 hours per week of this unpaid labor. And those 25 hours are aside from their 9 to 5. Men do a third of those hours. The 2023 Nobel Prize of Economics winner, Claudia Goldin, says that we will only truly have equality between genders at work when we start having equality of this unpaid labor in the house. So here we can already see that the world of work was not created to address the needs of anybody who is not a white, straight, cis man. And even though we evolved a lot from the Industrial Revolution, underrepresented groups still struggle to have any sort of representation at work. Now, just out of curiosity, did you know that Oxfam made a study in 2020 about this unpaid labor and found out that women and girls were dedicating 12.5 billion hours of unpaid care labor? If we value the same amount of hours in the minimum wage, this would be a contribution of 10.8 trillion American dollars to the world economy. Just for reference, this is 3 times the size of the tech industry globally. So because of the way things were built, these 10.8 trillion American dollars are basically lost because care labor is not considered important enough to receive money. Because under capitalism, something is important when it has a lot of capital. As simple as that. So to be able to really do something related to diversity, there is a cost. This cost is changing the very understanding we have of productivity. It's changing the role of straight white cis men in society. And although companies don't necessarily have this entire thing that I said at the top of their minds and they know exactly why it's so hard for them to do anything diversity related, this is structurally why it's so goddamn hard to do anything related to diversity. The most difficult part of all of this is make men understand that they have the most important role in changing this whole thing. And because straight white cis men is the only group that never had to self-organize and function as a group or a community to survive and guarantee rights, they were socially developed to be selfish when all the other groups looking for more opportunities, looking for more freedom, self-organized to be able to get stuff, to be able to survive, to be able to have rights guaranteed. And this is exactly the point that makes the diversity conversation very complicated. Because the very group that has the power to make a change like this and really use their space and their privilege and their assets to make the world a place where various different types of people have their needs met, that's not something that generally crosses their mind because they do not have the experience that we have as underrepresented groups. The thing that people say of this or that person only cares about this topic because it affects them, that is the very basis of how straight, white, cis men work. And these are the people who are in the positions of power and decision making. The Pokémon Company is a Japanese company that has offices in various parts of the world, and a portion of this global company is the Pokémon Company International, which is led by the United States. Culturally, Japan is not necessarily the most open country when it comes to queer people. As an example, gay marriage is still not legal there. So a Japanese company of huge proportions hardly makes anything for queer people. They also have a franchise that is mostly marketed for children. And as we all know, queer existences are generally kept away from children in a lot of places around the world. So even though the Pokémon Company International has a diversity and inclusion manifesto, they have employee resource groups. Apparently, as a company, they went to some prides. They are still under a Japanese company. Remember what I said about company culture being related to decision making and also being defined by the country that owns the company? It is very unlikely that Pokemon as a brand will intentionally do something out in the open saying, this is for queer people. We are doing this for queer people, everybody. It is very unlikely that they will intentionally and deliberately do something like that. But we still have queer people playing. We still have queer people casting. We have queer people working in the Pokemon Company International. And all of them are unapologetically queer. So even though we might never get something truly intentional, we always end up finding a way. As I finished this video, did I answer the question why we don't have more queer people in VGC? I'd say sorta kinda, because part of the answer is we are a little bit afraid because we live in a world that was not designed for us, and we see a version of that in any other male-dominated space. But a lot of queer people enjoy how VGC is structured, what goes into VGC, they identify with that, and they have fun doing that. And they're okay with having this trailblazer role. Another part of the question is, because there will never be any intentional action made by the very owners of the franchise, it is going to be harder for us to feel comfortable to at least explore and see if we like it, if we go to the world of VGC as it is. And I guess the third portion of this answer is, there is a corner in the world where queer people can be part of VGC, but more likely than not, it will not be the VGC we watch on the official events. It's probably always going to be in an alternate universe, a specific competition with a different set of rules, anywhere that allows us to experience self-expression and that sense of fantasy and novelty about being in a world where it doesn't matter who you are, what power you have. There's always a way that you can be successful and people are not judging you for who you are. So we will create those corners in the world. And we did. So we're able to be free, enjoy ourselves without any sort of retaliation of being who we are. And that's the most important thing. So do I think there will be more queer people in VGC? Of course, but it's going to be the same experience as any other competitive gaming, as we're going to keep fighting, yelling, and making a lot of noise to make people understand that it is not okay to retaliate based on who we are. And we just want to play a goddamn game without having to worry about our personal and psychological safety. And before I leave, I have a quick message for all of you companies out there. Did you know that if you take the money and assets of all the queer people in the world and consider this a country, this would be the equivalent of the 4th richest economy in the world? So how about you stop being dumb and be more genuine and deliberate about us? I promise you it's worth your money.
Bye. Mwah.